Welcome to Big City, Small Town, the weekly podcast all about San Antonio and the people who make it go and grow. I'm your host, Bob Rivard. This week's guest is San Antonio artist Oscar Alvarado. There is no mistaking his distinctive sculptures, many larger than life, covered with thousands of mosaic pieces of glass and tile that are seemingly everywhere in the city. Murals, sculptures, benches, bollards, and enhance the surfaces of columns, walls, and floors with mosaics in Alvarado's signature style. His work is inspired in part by the great Catalan architect and designer Antoni Gaudí, the father of Catalan modernism, who died nearly a century ago. Gaudí's many buildings in Spain and beyond remain some of the most distinctive and unique edifices in Europe. Alvarado, I'd argue, is having his own significant impact on his hometown. Oscar Alvarado, welcome to Big City, Small Town.
Thank you.
It seems like your work is everywhere. Yanaguana Gardens at Hemisphere and Palacio del Rio on the Riverwalk, Zarzamora bus stops and Elmendorf Lake on the west side. On the east side, MLK Park's I Am the Dream park bench, and as far north as the Rim on I-10 West. I am just mentioning a few of your major installations here, and that includes your newest one, the figurines that dominate the lobby to 300 Main, the new upscale residential tower downtown. How about sharing with our listeners, Oscar, how you became this recognized artist in our city that you are today and your roots in education? In other words, your life story.
Well, I never took an art class. I got a bachelor's of business administration from UTSA in 1985. I was a mathlete in high school and was encouraged to follow financial sort of goals, and that's what I got my education in. But I was completely bored with that. I spent a couple of years in the corporate world, moved to Los Angeles, made some money selling computer systems, and at one point was able to quit my job by the end of 1988, only after a few years in the corporate world. And I've been self-employed ever since. I traveled around to Europe and I saw some artists at work. And I thought, well, that's, they looked like they were enjoying themselves, and I liked what I was seeing being made. And I'm like, that's what I need to do. But I had no medium under my belt. I needed to learn how to make stuff.
Did I hear you use the word, I think it's the word, mathlete?
Yes.
I've never heard that before, but I like it. And I take it that your strength was mathematics in school, and that's what led teachers to tell you had a good business mind and should pursue it.
Absolutely, yeah. My twin brother has the exact same sort of, we ranked on the 99th percentile when we were tested on our math skills, so.
Well, I was absolutely terrible at math. It frightened me. It intimidated me. So we're not going to focus on that too much today, Oscar. I'm much more comfortable talking about art and your art world. But that is a very serious transition from left brain to right brain, to go from corporate business, selling computers, earning a good living, to wandering Europe and saying, I'm going to reinvent myself as an artist.
And I came back after that trip, ended up back in San Antonio and found an old vacant space downtown that I rented. I made a loft out of it. I wanted just to live a different lifestyle altogether than that sort of yuppie, get ahead thing that I was working on when I was in Los Angeles. So I lived downtown among the prostitutes and in buildings that businesses didn't want to be in, but they were vacant, so the rent was cheap, I probably just paid the taxes for the landowner with my rent.
You were from San Antonio, right? You are from San Antonio?
My family's been in San Antonio for about 285 years.
That is a long time.
Yeah.
What is their story?
I'm a direct descendant of Jose Antonio Navarro, and his mother came here from Mexico, and she was half Native American, or native, and half Spanish. And they had moved up to San Antonio. They were merchant class. They had a nice home.
Was that the Veramendi house?
No, but the Veramendis were eventually cousins, married into the family.
I mean, he was a great Texas
Ruiz
statesman.
Peña.
Okay.
And so Francisco Ruiz, who along with Jose Antonio Navarro, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, they were the only two people that signed the Texas Declaration of Independence that were actually born in Texas. And so I'm related to both of those guys.
That's a extraordinary legacy to have, and that's wonderful. Chris Christopherson, the singer-songwriter from Brownsville, Texas, just died a few weeks ago. And I was listening to a former interview that he did with Terry Gross on National Public Radio. And he talked about the fact that he was an Army Ranger, a helicopter pilot, a Rhodes Scholar, and was on his way to teaching at West Point when he just threw away everything and said, I've been writing songs since I was a kid. That's what I really want to do. It cost him his marriage. It cost him his relationship with his parents. And he just decided, I'm going to become a singer-songwriter. That's really where my passion is. And your story reminds me of that. And he told Terry Gross, everybody like me or Bob Dylan or whoever you want to name, we imagined ourselves first of who we wanted to become. And then we ended up becoming that artist. And it sounds to me like you were in Los Angeles and something triggered a change in your life and you imagined yourself as a different person and you've become that and more.
Yeah, I was toward the end of my career in Los Angeles in computers. I had my briefcase going to an appointment. I was a little early, and they had just destroyed a block of buildings in Los Angeles. And I'd parked on the street and was walking down, looking at some of the rubble, and I saw shiny objects. And I get my nice wingtips dirty. I walk through the field and I pick up these things, and I wrap them in a handkerchief and I put them in my briefcase. And I started making mosaics with these pieces and other pieces that I found at a garage sale in Venice.
Venice, California?
Yeah, in Venice, California. When I was living in Santa Monica at the time.
Nice.
And had rented a house with my two brothers. I moved up there first after I graduated from college, and then two of my brothers came. I said, you got to come here, guys. This is, the money was really good, and people from Texas had a better work ethic, and Californians were more likely to hire us. That's as they told us, we were there. So we rented a house, and I was in the master bedroom, and we had a 2-car garage. So we didn't park the cars there, and I decided to turn that into a studio. I didn't call it that. I just got a couple of basic tools and started making things.
So your original art was with found objects. On the other hand, you were already seeing mosaics as a medium, which is interesting, and I wonder how that came about.
It was the shiny objects, and then I bought a tile sampler at a garage sale. It was just like all these different types of tile and stone. That was basically it. At first, I didn't say to myself, "Oh, I'm going to be a mosaicist," at the time, and it took years of. Yeah, I'm autodidact in a lot of ways, self-taught. I would check out books from the library and try to reverse engineer some of the Roman mosaics, and then later on, I was able to get lessons from different artists who had studied in Italy. And an Italian artist himself, Manlio Cavallini. He's in his 90s. He's still here. He used to do mosaics for Diego Rivera, among other people. And one of the mosaics he created downtown is at Hemisphere Park. He did it for the artist Carlos
Merida, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay,
Merida.
the Mexican Carlos Merida.
So that particular mural was actually crafted, put together by Mr. Cavallini, who subsequently, years later, when I'm at his place buying glass, his assistants, his people weren't there at the shop, so he shows up. He asked me why I was buying it, and I told him I was making a mosaic, and he asked me how I would do it, and I told him, and he said, "Oh, that's the Venetian method." I'm like, "Okay," and he goes, "Let me teach you another method." And he took me into a studio, and he gave me a lesson, and it was more than an hour passed, and I was just like, it could have been a second. It was just amazing, just a super master giving me instruction.
Is he alive today here in San Antonio?
Yeah.
That's a remarkable story.
His company is still around, and his son and his grandson are in the business. I still buy stuff through their company.
So I described your art at the outset, Oscar, but I'd really like you to amplify that. I've been to a lot of artist studios in San Antonio over the years. I've never been to one like yours. It's part art studio, part industrial fabrication site. And what we haven't talked about is that at some point you learned how to work steel, and the size and weight and scope of your works require an incredibly sturdy under foundation, I guess I would say, what the viewer doesn't see, but that's under the mosaic. And so talk about that. And that's a completely different set of craft skills and work than the actual art image itself that you finish with.
Yeah, and I think I kind of am proud of the fact that a lot of my artist friends and contemporaries, will work with fabricators, or they'll get somebody else to do a lot of the work. Whereas I've learned almost every process I can't make tile. I buy tile already made, but I might buy $50,000 in ovens and learn how to make tile. I don't know. Yeah, I do all the work myself. I learned steel and concrete work from Carlos Cortez. I used to occupy an old gas station right kitty corner from his studio, and I turned it into a residence where I lived there. And I had sort of subdivided some rooms. Robert Tatum lived there. We had a little artist community.
This is in
there.
Southtown.
In Southtown,
right.
On Parita and St. Mary's.
That's right.
Yeah, and some of the mosaic is still there on the building, but they took a lot of it off.
I'll have to look for that. But talk about who Carlos Cortez is and the family for people that might not know that story.
Sure. Carlos is the third generation of a family who does faux bois. He works in concrete that looks like wood, and I think faux bois is like fake wood in French. And so I would just kind of stare at him from across the street. Then he invited me over, and he let me watch. And then, once in a while, he let me use his tools. And a lot of his tools are handmade to bend the steel. I learned about the different way you layer the different types of metal because of the expansion and contraction in the concrete. You want to make sure that it doesn't crack. And there's a lot of failures in the historic work that his great uncle did, Dionisio Rodriguez. And I was there to help him repair one or two of them. And so I learned what not to do as well, what had been done in the past. And in addition to what Carlos taught me, I've learned and got higher quality materials. I use stuff inside of my concrete to make it flexible and more resilient. So from those early days of Carlos teaching me how to bend steel and how to mix concrete, I bend steel now my own way. I have professional tools. I did make some tools like Carlos's that I learned. I do my own welding. I mix my own concrete. I have a small batch concrete plant. You said it looked like a construction site there because I've got this giant mixer with a conveyor belt, and I've got a concrete pump. Stuff I've acquired over the years. Instead of spending my commission money on vacations, I kept reinvesting in my craft.
Well, your Southside studio merits more conversation and fabrication shop. I shouldn't just call it a studio. It's on the near South Side. I can't remember if it's on Roosevelt or Pressa.
Yeah, I'm on Roosevelt, right at Highway 90.
There we go.
Got 200 feet of street frontage.
And you own that, correct?
I own it 50-50 with my twin brother.
Okay. It's unmistakable when you get there because you must be the owner and fabricator of the largest image of the Spurs Wemby that I know of that's standing out front. It must be 8 or 10 feet tall.
It's 16 feet.
That's astonishing.
And it's a few feet off the ground as well. So I had this idea. His name is Victor, and the Vitruvian Man. So I came up with this Victorvian Man concept where there's an image of him holding his arms out that is almost identical to the Vitruvian Man image. So I worked with
Da Vinci.
Da Vinci's, and I worked with artist Robert Tatum to help me transfer it into and so I've got a small graphic image that I won't be selling. I don't want to get sued, but that I've made some T-shirts that I give away.
Well, Wemby, if you're listening, you've been, compared now to a work of Da Vinci. So that adds another layer to your legacy here in San Antonio. At your studio and fabrication site, you have what I would call warehouses or bodegas that are just chocked full of materials that you've acquired over the years. It's just a treasure chest of raw material that you have to work with, everything from thousands or perhaps tens of thousands of mosaic pieces to very large, pieces of raw materials, whether it's steel or what's going to become concrete, et cetera, that I guess you've set aside for future projects that are somewhere in your brain that haven't been realized yet.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case. My twin brother, after a tragic accident where my wife was killed, decided to help me out by sponsoring me as an artist and just to keep me busy when I couldn't really focus on work. And so I went to a steel salvage yard, and he paid for a lot of steel. And I also have 10 yards of different types, 2 types of sand, 10 yards each, and then a mixed gravel that I use to mix my concrete with. I have a room filled with bags of cement. I think I have about $50,000 just in mosaic glass, porcelain, and natural stone in one of my studio rooms, and another of them, it's kind of like a bunch of little warehouses. The place used to restore travel trailers when we bought it, and we turned a lot of those trailers into offices and rooms, and then there's a big giant pole barn in the back that we re-roofed, re-sided, and insulated, and we've got several workshops in there.
Well, there must have been 6 or 7 people on site the day I visited, not to mention numerous dogs, somewhat protective dogs, I'd add. And there was just a very good feeling there. Everybody seemed to be happy they were there and doing what they're doing. So I guess that you and your brother attract other people that help you in the process of producing your art, that they're, in essence, artists, I don't know, interns or vendors or associates.
Yeah, there was one case where I showed up to do a mural at Fort Worth, and we built this giant shelter around a wall where I was to install the mural, and it took a day. And I had prefabricated these 4x8 panels of wall out of plywood and 2x4s, and I erected them together to fit around this wall and used the PVC pipes to make a roof with tarps. And the second day, I get ready to start installing the mosaic, which I'd created in my studio in San Antonio. And I cut it up into like 50-pound pieces. And the firemen finally walked over after watching us for 2 days. And they said, "Hey, we see that the contractors are here, but when is the artist going to show up?" And the point is that, I do the work. And, people think the artist just sits there and maybe paints a pretty picture. I'm not really sure. But it's really hard work. I have cuts in my hands to prove it.
You mentioned a work in Fort Worth. I'm obviously most familiar with your work here in San Antonio, but I did wonder as we were preparing for this episode, how often you get or pursue commissions outside the city and where others can see your art outside of San Antonio.
I used to pursue it more through different national websites, Call for Artists, and Public Artists, and it's a lot of times I'm competing against the call will go out where I make stuff out of, let's say, 30,000 pieces of tile for one of my mosaics that I created in the Hilton Hotel downtown. And somebody else will just make a painting, let's say 5 feet wide. They'll send it to a computer who then goes to some sort of machine that inks this painting onto tile at a larger scale. And then other people come and install the tile. So that the expense for that is probably less than what it costs me in all the labor hours to put together 30,000 pieces and to put each one on one at a time. Each one had to be cut before that. So I find myself in that aspect competing against these people and not really feeling good about it because it's the budgets aren't the same. My stuff is more labor intensive. So I'm not doing that so much. I'm lucky enough to have a few patrons, some members of the McCombs family and my friend Henry Munoz, who currently have hired me to make pieces for their estates. So
here in San Antonio or elsewhere?
2 in San Antonio, and for Henry Munoz, I'm making this 3 2-ton pieces that will sit on his mountaintop 22-acre estate in Santa Fe.
Wow. And so you'll have to build and fabricate that here and transport it there, or will you do some of the work here and some in the high country in New Mexico? How will that work?
I was up there last year, and I've already poured the foundation for it. I had my engineer look at it and see what it needs, so I went underground. I rented the equipment there. I did all of the work. I did have an assistant.
There's worse places to work, Oscar.
Yeah. Oh, and it was really tough staying in Henry's master suite while he was gone. Beautiful. I was just looking. It was 1 year ago, and I had photos come up on my Facebook. It said, "You posted this a year ago." I was like,
oh. The artist privilege. Well, we recently had the opportunity to walk here from the Ram building across Legacy Park and over to 300 Main, the new high-rise residential development here by Weston Urban, and we're just astonished by the 4 figures, I think. Is it 3 or maybe 3 that are in the lobby that are larger than life? And I wonder if you just talk about your inspiration for those and what they represent.
I've been playing with these sort of amorphic, started out as anthropomorphic, but they got less human-like as I drew them and resolved how to create them. Images, I was inspired to do after not getting one of the San Antonio 300 commissions on the river, I was really hell-bent on promoting indigenous culture. So I created in drawings and in my mind a 36-foot sculpture that I wanted to put on the San Pedro Creek. And it was somewhat like those figures that you saw there in 300 Main. But I've been experimenting with these figures and then how to make them, how to use my process, the concrete, the steel, to create these pieces that will be, last 1,000 years. And since I didn't get it, but I was just I had it in my head to do these processes. And it was a combination of techniques that I'd learned and developed. And so anytime I got the opportunity for another commission subsequently, I kind of stuck with that original design. And so that's where those sort of alien-like figures came from. Originally, I was trying to, forget Christopher Columbus. Let's promote the Native Americans that have survived all of the invasion. And I'm 18.5% Coyoltecan. So, the rest of us had to assimilate.
Well, they're literally spirited pieces. And if you use the word alien, I did think as we were looking at those that if there's life elsewhere in this universe, maybe this is what it looks like. But on the one hand, there's an enormity to the pieces when you walk in. On the other hand, there's some incredible grace to them with the curvature that you somehow achieve on something so big and that weighs so much. There's a delicate quality to that, which is very interesting for a piece of that scope and size that must require some remarkable engineering and almost, you talked earlier about your math skills. I looked at those and thought, I wonder whether or not that piece is represented first by an equation that says it's possible to do that with something that seems to defy gravity. And I tried actually to study how you anchor those pieces, and you really succeed in hiding how you do a lot of that.
Yeah, that was actually a challenging part because I had to work in conjunction with one of the contractors there who did not supply me with those steel frames that they go into until very late in my process. And so I had to adapt on how I built these things, and they're very heavy. And I worked on them mostly by myself in my studio with heavy equipment that I used to turn and rotate them and stuff like that. A winch hanging from the ceiling,
Well, we will put those on our social media, in our social media channels, and maybe on our website so people can see some examples of your work and link to your website where there's examples of other past work that you've done. What are you working on next?
Well, currently I am working on many projects at once in a way, but I'm in the design phase for the McCombs sisters, each of them, their projects. So nothing solid on the ground yet. For Henry Munoz's project, I am about 80% through. And, when the payments come, I'll work more on it. And then when he finally has the time to schedule me to go up there to do it. So, it's tough. The he's a real busy man. He owns a movie studio in Hollywood.
The timeline from commission to installation must be extraordinary for you. This is not an artist in a studio painting on canvas. It's so much more complex, and the physical challenges that particularly involving geography and placement, or inside a building like at 300 Main, where you've got to adapt the work to. This is a very busy public space, and it has to be a safe space, and there's a lot of other function that has to occur around that form that you've done. I'm guessing that you must realize completion of a piece sometimes more than a year, more than a couple of years.
It does take a while. It depends on which part of what I do that I'm doing. I am actually currently working the physical thing that you will see in my studio right now on a series of mosaics that will go inside the amphitheater courtyard at the Alamo College's district headquarters on North Main. And years ago, I did, when they first developed that building, a mosaic for the stage they have at that amphitheater. And they subsequently hired me to enhance the adjacent walls in a similar manner.
Oh,
so that's actually what I'm working on right now. And it's hundreds of square feet. It took me 2 weeks just to start to cut the tile and prepare it. And I have it all in bins and boxes in my studio. And I had to create a special easel because these are long pieces. There's 56-foot long wall. Another one is is 48 feet. So I had to create, my studio's only 32 feet long, the one I'm working in, because it's air conditioned. So I had to create an easel, a horizontal easel to make these pieces out of wood, and that make it comfortable for me to work, but also that I can set the tile without it sliding down. I can't have a vertical easel because it won't stick. So I have to create these easels, and sometimes for a piece I did at Texas A&M University a couple years ago, I had to create a way to get to the higher areas without a scaffold because it's slanted forward. So I suspended my seating from the ceiling. I kind of enjoy doing all this engineering like things you say. I actually received a presidential scholarship to Texas A&M in 1980 for engineering. So I did study physics and such for a while before I withdrew and got my degree in business.
I've seen that mosaic at Alamo Colleges, and I'm very taken with the whole property, the former Playland, Ford, Powell and Carson, Rialto. I can't remember the name of the other West East Design Group that put that project together from, I think it was about 12 acres of vacant property there abutting Fort Sam Houston and just east of Broadway. When you get a commission like that, is that because an architecture firm has reached out and said, you're part of our overall scheme, or is that the Alamo Colleges themselves made the decision to bring you in and commission a piece?
Well, a friend of mine, Martha Henry, had a friend who worked at Alamo Colleges, and I guess they were talking, and they were looking for someone to do. They had an idea for that amphitheater, and they wanted it in tile. So Martha had suggested me, and so that's how I got that introduction. And I really went low on the price because I wanted to be able to do this, and I needed my work to be in other public spaces. And it was just part of my career where I will put the vast majority of the budget into the work itself and pay myself very little. I've been able to live a bohemian lifestyle in Southtown for 30 years now, because 30 years ago, real estate was cheap.
I want to talk about that in a minute, but first I want to ask you about another Mexican-American artist, and I don't know if you ever knew him or not, or compare yourself to him in terms of the scale of your work, but that's Luis Jimenez, who died in a construction accident in 2006, I think, in his own Colorado studio. He was the artist behind the famous Blue Mustang sculpture that anybody who's ever been to Denver International Airport sees either when you're landing or taking off
giant,
or driving. It is huge. There's no missing it, and it's dramatic, and it certainly succeeds in every way, in my opinion, as a public artwork. It's something that people remember and talk about, much like the Bean in Chicago and Millennium Park, and so forth. But he died doing his work because there's a danger to that fabrication. And I found myself, as I wandered around your studio, saying, there's a lot that's happening here that is in the area of fabrication that I think is higher risk than what most of us do at work every day. And I wonder whether or not, as you're working with these large pieces, whether it's in the production phase or the installation phase, whether or not you have to take sort of extraordinary measures to make sure that you don't suffer the kind of accident that Luis Jimenez suffered.
There are times when I'm working alone in my studio and I think, just one mistake, I've got a hoist and I've got a ton up in the air. One mistake and it could fall on me, and there's no one around other than the dogs to help me out. I'm really careful. I have lots of safety equipment that I use, and when I have assistants and people that work with me, I insist that they wear safety equipment. I bore people sometimes when we're especially when I'm moving and transporting these big pieces. I did a giant sculpture for the City of Odessa Police Department, and just to figure out, I made it vertically, and I had to figure out, once it was this 3-4 ton piece was made, I had to lay it down on its side and then put it onto a trailer. So I had to create a giant horse, figure out the center of mass, and then balance it, lift it up with a pair of bobcats, and then drop it onto a frame that I'd made onto this steel trailer. And, I figured all that stuff out, and that's kind of fun. That's kind of the fun part for me too, is, I know a lot of artists that don't do any of that. They just hire a mover.
That sounds like shade tree engineering to me, but.
Well, you know what? It's behind a fence.
Two bobcats.
Well, one bobcat couldn't carry it; it didn't have the capacity, so we had to get a pair.
I'd like to watch at a safe distance one of your artworks upon completion leave the studio. That must be quite an occasion in the neighborhood.
Even strapping it down to the trailers, all of that is and then driving it. It's kind of a harrowing drive, All the way up to Odessa was tough, and you don't go fast with a trailer carrying a few tons.
Well, I was recently out in West Texas in Marathon and Alpine and Marfa, but it was particularly in Marfa where it's such a draw for artists and people that support the arts. And I thought to myself that the one thing outside of Donald Judd's installations, Marfa doesn't have a lot of what I would call really arresting public art, although it has this vastness of the West Texas desert with the mountain backgrounds that in my mind make it ideal for some larger than life works. And I knew that at the time I was out there that you were coming on, and I made a note to myself, ask Oscar if he's ever done anything in Marfa or out in West Texas, because his work is as big as Big Bend in a way and deserves to be out there.
Out there, I think my work would look smaller and smaller because of how you described the background, I don't know. Again, I didn't study art, so I don't think I quite get the minimalism. And so
I don't either. It's okay.
All the hype about Donald Judd. It's kind of cool that the Chinati Foundation and architects and artists have met there and discussed, the integration of the two crafts. But no, I don't think my stuff belongs there. I think it needs to be in a setting, in a city where more people can touch it, interact with it, talk about it.
We're running short on time here, Oscar, but I would be remiss if I didn't get personal for a moment and ask how you're doing. I think for the first 25 years that I knew you, I never once saw you without St. Shimi at your side. You were an inseparable couple in Southtown where my wife and I live, Monica and I live, and you were just everywhere together. She was your life partner, and I think a lot of our people in our audience recognize the name, but for those that don't, she was a theater artist and arts educator. And she died tragically in 2020, only 49 years old, after being fatally struck by a vehicle near her Blanco Road studio after she stepped off a Via bus and was crossing the street. She was very well known in the theater and dance community, including her work with Jumpstart Performance Company and with Stars and Garters Burlesque. She choreographed and performed pole dance pieces and taught pole dancing. And I know that obviously had a profound impact on you. And I just wonder, as an artist and as an individual, how you fared in the 4 years since that loss occurred.
It's still a bit raw at times. I grieved heavily, and after about a year and a half or so, I looked in the mirror, and I hadn't done that. I'd realized that I kind of was letting myself go. And I started, I had some skin tags develop on my face like you wouldn't believe. So I went to a dermatologist, and I had a mole that was bleeding on my back. And I said, hey, could you look at that? They removed it, and they found out it was a tumor. It was cancerous. So I didn't have insurance, but I had some money saved, so I opted for the operation, and then they explained to me that I would have to go through a chemotherapy or immunotherapy process, and it was $52,000 a dose, and I couldn't afford it. So thank you, John McCain. Thank you, Barack Obama, for Obamacare, because I was able to sign up with my very major pre-existing condition. I'd been a vegan, a vegetarian. I never took pharmaceuticals my whole life. I didn't get sick, and then boom. Stage 3 cancer.
When was that?
I'm getting through that. That was about a year and a half ago when I discovered it, and I'm getting through. I've already had 11 out of 12 immunotherapy sessions. So
do you feel like you're on the mend and in remission?
Yeah, I don't know about that remission thing. I don't know how I've felt throughout the whole process. It is the chemicals do affect you. I don't know. My last treatment is in a week, and I will know. The oncologist will let me know if I have to go through another year or, we can let it go. So
Well, we'll stay close in touch with you because we'd like to hear that. I just think you're one of the most extraordinary artists I've had the privilege of getting to know in San Antonio, and I've gotten to know quite a few. The scale of your work means that we don't have it at our home, but maybe someday out in our yard. I think the impact that you're having on the city is enormous. I'm really surprised to hear for the first time that you didn't get a commission for the tricentennial. I can't imagine why that decision was made, but that's probably another conversation. Wish you well in a week, and congratulations on all your great work, and thanks for coming on to Big City, Small Town.
Great. It's been fun chatting with you.
Likewise.